I used to love school trips. They were the one thing that broke up the dull routine of classes, homework, and cafeteria lunches. When the permission slip for a spring history excursion to a small colonial town arrived, I was more excited than I had been for anything in months. It wasn't far from where I lived, about a 2-hour bus ride, but it promised cobblestone streets, historic houses, and a chance to roam around with my friends outside the walls of the school. At the time, I didn't know that trip would end up being the last time I felt truly safe. The morning we left was overcast, the kind of day where the clouds hang low and the air feels heavy. My mom dropped me off at school, kissed me goodbye, and told me to stick close to my friends. It's funny, and she always said that. It was one of those mom phrases you hear so often it loses meaning. That day it would end up echoing in my head again and again. The bus ride was loud and full of laughter. Everyone was talking over one another, swapping snacks, playing music from their phones. I sat with my best friend Jordan near the back, watching the trees blur past as we drove deeper into the countryside. The town we were visiting, Ashbury, was small, barely even on the map. It was one of those places where time seemed to stop decades ago, and most of the residents were older folks who'd lived there their entire lives. It seemed harmless, quaint even. When we arrived, we were split into groups of 4 and given a worksheet for a scavenger hunt. It was the teacher's way of making sure we actually paid attention to the historical landmarks. Jordan and I teamed up with 2 other friends, Mia and Caleb, and we set off down one of the main cobblestone streets. The sun had come out and the town looked like something out of a postcard. Brick buildings with faded signs, old-fashioned lampposts, and a small park in the center with a fountain that had long stopped working. At first, everything was normal. We visited the old courthouse, took pictures of a Revolutionary War statue, and wrote down dates from plaques. Around noon, we stopped at a tiny diner to get ice cream and sit in the shade. That's when I first noticed him. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, was a man I didn't recognize. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with thinning hair, a faded denim jacket, and a limp in his left leg. He wasn't doing anything unusual. He was just staring, not at the street or the buildings. At us directly. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just people watching. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But when we got up and started walking again, I noticed him again about 15 minutes later. This time he was sitting on a bench pretending to read a newspaper. But every time I glanced back, his eyes were on us. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to sound paranoid. But by the 3rd time I saw him, this time standing near the entrance of a small alleyway as we passed, I nudged Jordan and whispered, "That guy's following us." Jordan glanced over his shoulder, then laughed. "You're imagining things, am I?" I asked. "He's been behind us since the diner. Maybe he just happens to be going the same way." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But when we turned onto a side street toward the next historical site and I glanced back again, there he was, 20 paces behind, matching our turns. He wasn't close enough to seem obvious, but he wasn't far enough to be random, I told the others. Caleb shrugged it off. Mia said maybe he was part of a tour group, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just that he was following us, it was the way he looked at us. Not curious, not confused, just intent. We decided to stick to crowded areas after that. We visited a museum, then a gift shop, and each time I checked, I either saw him outside or passing by a window. I started to feel sick. It was like we were mice and he was just waiting for us to wander somewhere quiet. By the time the worksheet was nearly done, we were supposed to meet the rest of the class at the old Ashbury Mill, a historical landmark on the far edge of town. It was a 15-minute walk down a narrow road lined with trees and old warehouses. Most of the groups had already headed that way, and the teachers were expecting us there by 3:00 p.m. We hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell a teacher what was happening. But what would I even say? Some guy's been following us all day. They'd probably tell me I was overreacting. And besides, he hadn't done anything, and not yet. We decided to go as a group and stick close together. The road was mostly empty, except for the occasional parked truck. The further we walked, the quieter it got. The noise of the main town faded behind us, replaced by the crunch of gravel and the rustle of wind in the trees. About halfway down the road, I looked back. My heart nearly stopped. He was there. Closer now, maybe 50 feet behind us, walking slowly, deliberately. When I locked eyes with him, he didn't look away. He just smiled, guys, I whispered. He's still following us, Caleb turned. Jesus, okay, that's not just a coincidence anymore. Let's walk faster, Mia said. If we get to the mill, there'll be people. We picked up the pace. So did he. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The road curved ahead and the trees grew denser. For a moment, we were out of sight of the town completely. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Quicker, heavier. He was gaining on us. Run, Jordan hissed. We bolted. The four of us sprinted down the gravel road, our shoes slamming against the ground, breath ragged. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see how close he was. All I could hear was the pounding of footsteps behind us and the blood roaring in my ears. The old mill came into view, a tall, weathered building with a rusted water wheel and a small parking lot in front. Relief flooded me. We were almost there, but when we reached the parking lot, it was empty. Completely empty. Where is everyone? Mia gasped. They must still be inside, Caleb said. Come on. We ran up the steps and yanked on the door. It was locked. No, 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 I muttered, pulling harder. It didn't budge. Behind us, the footsteps slowed. I turned. He was standing about 20 feet away, breathing heavily, his eyes locked on us. The smile was gone. Now there was just something cold and hungry in his expression. What do you want? Jordan shouted. The man didn't answer. He took a step closer. Then another. We need to go, Mia whispered. Now. There was a path that led around the side of the mill into the woods. Without thinking, we took it. Branches whipped at my arms as we stumbled through the trees, deeper and deeper. The sound of his footsteps followed, steady and relentless. We reached a small clearing and stopped, gasping for breath. I pressed my back against a tree, trying to listen. The woods were silent. Too silent. Did we lose him? Caleb asked. I don't know, I said. That's when the twig snapped. I spun around. He was there. Closer than ever. His expression had changed again. No longer a hunter's calm, but frustration, even anger. You shouldn't have run, he said softly. It was the first time I'd heard his voice. It was quiet, almost conversational, and somehow that made it worse. Stay away from us, Mia shouted, her voice trembling. He tilted his head. I just want to talk. Then talk from there, Jordan said. He took another step forward. You're making this harder than it needs to be. We started backing away, but he matched every step. That's when I realized he wasn't just following us. He was hurting us. Pushing us deeper into the woods, away from the road, away from anyone who could help. I grabbed Jordan's arm. We have to go now. We turned and ran again, crashing through underbrush, stumbling over roots. I could hear him behind us, branches breaking under his boots. I didn't know how long we ran, only that when we finally stopped, I had no idea where we were. The mill was gone. The road was gone. Just trees. Endless trees. Panic set in. Mia was crying. Caleb was swearing under his breath. Jordan was trying to get a signal on his phone, but there was nothing. Then silence. No footsteps. No branches, nothing. Do you think he's gone? Caleb whispered. I don't know, I said. Maybe he gave up. We waited. A minute passed. Then 2, then 5. Still nothing. Slowly we started moving again, trying to find our way back. That's when we saw it, a small cabin. Old, rotted, half-collapsed. At first I thought maybe we could use it to get our bearings. Maybe there'd be a road nearby. But as we got closer, my stomach turned. The windows were boarded up. The door hung off its hinges. And carved into the wood over and over were names. Dozens of them. Some were fresh. We didn't go inside. We turned and ran. It took us nearly an hour to find the mill again. By the time we stumbled out of the woods, our teacher was standing outside, furious and terrified. The rest of the class had been waiting for us. We told her everything, the man, the chase, the cabin. She called the police immediately. They searched the woods for hours. They never found him. Not a footprint, not a trace. But a week later, the police contacted my parents. They'd found something near the old cabin, an abandoned backpack with children's belongings inside. Some of them had been reported missing years ago. I still dream about that man, about his smile, about the way he said, "You shouldn't have run." And sometimes when I'm walking home alone or waiting at a bus stop, I swear I feel eyes on me again, and I wonder if he ever stopped looking. I still don't know why our school thought a hiking trip in the middle of nowhere was a good idea for a group of 17-year-olds. Maybe they believed it would build character or teach us teamwork. Maybe they just wanted to keep us busy during the last week before summer break. All I know is that if I had known what was waiting for us in those woods, I would have faked being sick, broken my own leg, anything to stay home. It started like every other field trip, chaotic. Students scrambling to find seats on the bus, teachers shouting names off a list, everyone in high spirits because, hey, a day without classes was always a good day. There were 20 of us from my outdoor studies elective and 2 teachers, Mr. Parker, the kind of laid-back guy who wore hiking boots to class, and Ms. Bell, who'd never been on a trail in her life but thought this trip would be fun. The plan was to hike a 5-mile trail through Black Ridge National Forest, stop for lunch by a river, and return before dusk. Black Ridge was about 2 hours away from our town. I remember watching the scenery change from suburban sprawl to endless rows of pine trees pressing against the highway. As we turned onto a narrow forest road, the cell signal died, and the asphalt gave way to gravel. "Welcome to the wilderness," Mr. Parker announced cheerfully. I tried to laugh along, but there was something unsettling about how quickly civilization had disappeared. The trees grew denser, taller, and older, as if they had been standing there long before humans ever existed. We arrived at the trailhead around 10 a.m. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and the forest smelled like pine and damp earth. Everyone was excited, snapping photos and joking as we started walking. The first couple of miles were easy, winding paths, birdsong overhead, sunlight breaking through the canopy. It felt peaceful, safe. It was around noon when things started to change. We stopped by the river for lunch as planned. The teachers spread out a picnic blanket while some of us skipped stones across the water. I remember sitting with my best friend Owen, sharing a bag of chips and laughing about something stupid. Everything felt normal, until I saw him. Across the river, just beyond the tree line, a man was standing perfectly still. He was maybe 50 feet away, too far to see clearly, but I could make out the outline of a faded brown jacket and a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't hiking, he had no gear, no backpack, nothing. He was just watching us. "Do you see that?" I nudged Owen and pointed. He squinted. "Huh, probably another hiker. Where's his pack? Maybe he's just out for a walk." Maybe. But something about the way he stood there, silent, motionless, made my stomach twist. I looked away for a second to call over Mr. Parker, but when I turned back, the man was gone. Vanished, like he'd melted into the forest. We brushed it off. People hike all the time, right? Maybe he just walked away. But that image stuck with me. The way he didn't move, didn't wave, didn't break eye contact. It felt less like curiosity and more like intent. After lunch, we packed up and continued deeper into the woods. That's when Mr. Parker decided to take the scenic route. He claimed there was a lesser-known loop trail that would shave off a mile and lead us to a lookout point. I didn't like the idea of leaving the main path, but he seemed confident. We followed him. An hour passed. Then another. The sun was sinking lower, painting the forest in gold and orange. And then we hit a problem. The trail disappeared. At first it was just overgrown, faint. Then it was gone completely, swallowed by the underbrush. Mr. Parker frowned and unfolded a paper map. "Huh, that's odd. We should have hit the junction by now." "What do you mean, should have?" Ms. Bell asked, panic creeping into her voice. "We must have veered off." "No big deal. We'll just backtrack." We turned around. Except the path we came from was gone too. It was as if the forest had shifted behind us, closing in, erasing any trace of where we'd been. Panic started bubbling in my chest. We were lost. By 5 p.m. we were still wandering, trying to relocate the trail. Our water was running low, and the shadows between the trees were lengthening. That's when Owen grabbed my arm. "Dude, look." About 50 yards ahead, partially hidden behind a tree, was the man in the brown jacket, the same man from the river. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring again. This time I knew I wasn't imagining it. Others saw him too. Whispers rippled through the group. "Who is that? Is he following us?" Mr. Parker shouted, "Hello, sir, we're lost. Can you help us?" But the man didn't respond. He slowly stepped back into the shadows and vanished. We picked up the pace after that. No one wanted to admit it, but we were scared. The teachers tried to stay calm, reassuring us we'd find the trail soon, but the fear was spreading like wildfire. Every crack of a branch made us jump. Every rustle in the undergrowth felt like footsteps. Around 6:30, we found a small clearing and decided to stop for the night. The teachers built a fire and told us to stay close. "We'll wait for daylight," Mr. Parker said. It's too dangerous to keep walking in the dark. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that man standing just beyond the firelight watching us. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps circling the clearing, but when I strained to listen, there was only silence. The next morning, we set out again, following the rising sun eastward. We walked for hours and still no trail, no signs, nothing. That's when things went from bad to worse. Owen was the first to notice it. A crude structure hidden among the trees. It looked like a makeshift cabin, built from scavenged wood and rusted metal sheets. Smoke was rising from a small chimney. Relief washed over us, finally someone who could help. We approached cautiously. Mr. Parker called out, "Hello? Is anyone home?" No answer. He knocked on the door. It creaked open. Inside was chaos. Animal bones scattered across the floor. Jars filled with cloudy liquid lined the shelves. And in the corner, a wall covered in Polaroid photos, dozens of them. They were all of people, hikers, campers, some smiling, some terrified. And in the background of almost every picture, that man, always watching. Then Owen gasped, "Dude, that's us." I looked where he was pointing. There we were, me, Owen, and our classmates sitting by the river just yesterday. And another photo, us sleeping around the campfire. Someone had been there. Someone had taken those pictures. Everyone out. Now. Mr. Parker's voice was trembling. We stumbled back into the daylight, fear turning into full-blown panic. And that's when I saw him, standing about 20 feet away, just beyond the trees. Brown jacket, hat, smiling, "Run!" Mr. Parker shouted. We bolted. Branches whipped our faces, roots snagged our shoes, but we didn't stop. I could hear footsteps behind us, fast, heavy. They weren't animal footsteps. They were human. We ran for what felt like hours, blind with terror. Finally, by some miracle, we stumbled onto a dirt road. Not a trail, an actual road. 10 minutes later, a park ranger truck appeared. We waved frantically until it screeched to a stop. They radioed for help and got us out of there. The police searched the woods but found nothing. No man, no cabin, no photos. They said we'd probably stumbled into an old trapper's shack and imagined the rest in our panic. But we all knew what we saw. We didn't imagine the photos. We didn't imagine the footsteps. And we definitely didn't imagine that man. It's been 5 years since that trip, and I still dream about the woods. About the man watching us from the shadows. About the feeling that we were never supposed to leave. Sometimes when I'm walking home at night, I swear I see someone across the street standing perfectly still, wearing a brown jacket and a wide-brimmed hat. Watching. Always watching. It's been more than 8 years since our high school field trip to the Whitlock Historical Museum, and I still can't walk into a museum without feeling sick. It's not the dusty old exhibits or the smell of varnished wood and aged paper that bothers me. It's the memory of what we found beneath that building. What they let us see. What they tried to hide. Back then, I was 16 and attending Brimfield High. Our history teacher, Mr. Callahan, was one of those teachers who really believed in learning by experience. So, when the Whitlock Museum announced a new exhibition on early 19th century urban life, he jumped at the chance for a class field trip. I didn't care much for history, but a day out of school was always worth it. The museum was about 2 hours away in an old part of the city, the kind of district with narrow cobblestone streets, leaning brick buildings and gas lamp-style streetlights that still flickered yellow at night. The Whitlock itself looked like something out of a Gothic novel. A looming 3-story structure with spires, wrought iron fences, and arched windows blackened by time. According to Mr. Callahan, it used to be a mansion in the 1800s, then a hospital, then finally a museum. He said that like it was a fun fact. I remember thinking it sounded more like the opening to a horror movie. We arrived just before noon. The museum staff, mostly older volunteers, greeted us with polite smiles and ushered us inside. The interior was even more atmospheric. High ceilings, ornate staircases, paintings with eyes that seemed to follow you. The air was cool and heavy, and there was this faint metallic scent I couldn't place, something between rust and old blood. We split into groups and were assigned a guide, a thin woman named Marjorie who spoke with a soft, almost rehearsed tone. She showed us around the usual exhibits, antique medical tools, old dolls, photographs of the original Whitlock family who built the house. Nothing unusual, but what caught my attention was a heavy oak door at the end of a side corridor. It was chained shut and marked with a rusted plaque that read, "Sub-level access restricted." "Why is that door locked?" one of my classmates, Emily, asked. Marjorie hesitated. Just for a second. Then she smiled tightly. "That's part of the old storage area. It's unsafe and not open to the public. It should have ended there. But you know how teenagers are. Unsafe and off-limits might as well be invitations." The trip went smoothly until about an hour before we were scheduled to leave. Our group had been given a 30-minute break to explore the exhibits on our own. Owen, the same Owen from the hiking trip a year before, nudged me and grinned. "Want to see what's behind that door?" I should have said no. God, I wish I had. We waited until the nearest staff member turned a corner, then slipped down the side corridor. The chain on the oak door looked old, but the padlock was new. That was strange. Even stranger, there were deep scratch marks on the door frame, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. "Dude," I whispered. "Come on," Owen said, producing a small pocket knife. He was always good with locks, and after a few minutes of fiddling, the padlock snapped open. The chain clattered to the floor and we pushed the door open. A breath of stale, cold air wafted out, air that hadn't seen daylight in decades. The staircase beyond was narrow and steep, spiraling into darkness. There were no lights, no signs, nothing but the faint sound of dripping water echoing from below. Every instinct told me to back out, relock the door, and pretend we were never there. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when you're 16 and stupid. We descended with our phone flashlights cutting through the darkness. The deeper we went, the colder it became. The air was thick now, damp, musty, with a faint, acrid undertone. The walls changed from plaster to rough stone. The building above felt centuries away. At the bottom of the stairs, we found ourselves in a long, low corridor lined with heavy iron doors. Most were sealed shut with rusted bolts. Some had nameplates and Storage 1A, Archive 3C, but one had no label at all, and unlike the others, it was slightly ajar. We looked at each other, neither wanting to be the first to open it. Finally, Owen pushed. The hinges groaned and the door creaked open to reveal a room unlike anything in the museum upstairs. It was a surgical ward. Wooden tables stained black with age lined the walls. Rusted saws, scalpels, and bone drills hung from hooks. Glass jars filled with yellowish fluid and floating. Things occupied shelves that stretched to the ceiling. Human things, organs, hands, eyes. And in the center of the room was a steel gurney bolted to the floor. Straps dangled from its sides. There were gouges in the metal, deep, frantic gouges, like someone had struggled against their restraints until their fingers broke. "This isn't storage," I whispered. Owen swallowed hard. "What the hell is this?" I don't know what compelled me to look under the gurney, but I did. That's when I saw it. A small wooden box no bigger than a lunch tin. Inside were dozens of photographs, black and white, sepia-toned, and some in faded color. They showed patients, gaunt, hollow-eyed figures strapped to tables with crude surgical markings across their bodies. Some looked alive, some didn't. And then I found one that made my blood run cold. It was a photo of the museum basement, this room, but it wasn't empty. A man in a long coat and leather gloves stood beside the gurney, smiling for the camera. And on the table lay a teenage boy, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a silent scream. "This place used to be a hospital," I remembered Mr. Callahan saying, but this wasn't a hospital. It was something else. Something worse. We should have run then. We should have gone back upstairs, locked the door, and never spoken of it again. But before we could, we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the corridor. We froze. The light from our phones trembled as we killed them and backed into the shadows. The footsteps drew closer. Clack, clack, clack. And then a silhouette appeared in the doorway. It was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a long coat. The figure paused, listening. Then it stepped into the room. It was a mannequin, or at least that's what I thought. It didn't move like a person. It was stiff, jerky. But then it turned its head and I realized with horror that it wasn't a mannequin at all. It was a man wearing an antique plague doctor mask. The beak-like nose glistened with moisture. The lenses of the mask caught the dim light and reflected it back at us like eyes. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. The man snapped toward the sound, and that's when we bolted. We ran down the corridor, our footsteps echoing off the stone. Behind us, we heard the slow, measured pace of boots following. We tore up the stairs 2 at a time, burst through the oak door, and slammed it shut behind us. Owen shoved the chain back through the handle just as the footsteps reached the top. There was a pause. Then, bang! Something struck the other side of the door, hard. We stumbled back, hearts racing as the blows kept coming. Bang, 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 and then silence. We didn't tell anyone, not then. We were terrified, shaking but also terrified of getting expelled or worse. We told our teacher we'd gotten lost looking for the restroom. He scolded us, but that was it. 2 weeks later, the Whitlock Museum announced a sudden closure for renovations. When it reopened months later, the oak door was gone, replaced with a smooth plaster wall. No mention of a basement. No mention of the restricted area. But that wasn't the end. A year later, on a rainy afternoon, Owen showed up at my house pale and shaking. He held a photo in his hand, an old photograph, black and white, water-stained. It was one of us standing by that chained door in the museum hallway. Someone had taken it from the shadows. "I found it taped to my front door," he whispered. More photos followed, one on my windshield, one slipped into my locker. All of them grainy, all of them showing us and walking to school, sitting in class, eating lunch. And always, in the corner of the frame, a tall figure in a long coat. Watching, I don't know who he was. I don't know what happened in that basement or how many people vanished there. All I know is that someone tried to erase that place from history, and someone else remembers. Someone who never left. Sometimes when I walk past an alley or look out my bedroom window, I swear I see that shape again, standing in the rain, watching, waiting. And in my nightmares, I'm back in that room, the smell of rust and blood thick in the air, the straps hanging loose, the photos scattered across the floor. And somewhere in the dark, the slow, patient sound of boots approaching. Clack. Clack, clack.